Hi everyone, this video is for January 6th or 7th. In this video, we are going to go over a couple announcements that I had for everyone in class, and we will start talking about our first unit of this new semester, which is genetics. And I have three things that we're going to do, all of which focus on vocabulary, which doesn't sound too fun, but it is going to be really important because we're going to use a lot of new words and we're going to use them often. So it's important that you know what they mean before you just start going for it. So at first, we started with a Quizlet to kind of give you an introduction to the words and definitions. Then we came together to do some notes. I talked through slides that I put together to give context to those vocabulary words. And then we'll end with a practice worksheet. It's less of a worksheet, but it is an assignment. And it's going to just make sure that you understand the difference between a few main vocabulary words. For the announcements, I just have the two. So on Monday or Tuesday, the first day of the week, we talked about the syllabus for this class, and I gave you the opportunity to take the syllabus quiz during our class period. Now, if you were there and you were able to take it, they are graded and are in Skyward now. So if you are watching this and you have not done the syllabus quiz, please do so as soon as you can. Second off, I noticed when I was grading some of those syllabus quizzes that when I asked you what to do when you miss a class, too many students still did not mention these ICYMI videos. Now, of course, emailing me, messaging me, asking your friends, or checking Canvas are all great things. This video is going to be the best first step to take if you miss a class. Obviously, you're here, so you kind of know what the in case you missed it videos are and where to find them. But just know that if you're watching this video after missing a class and you did this first, then you are doing exactly what you should be doing, which is awesome. Alrighty, for the next part, we will be moving to Canvas. So when you're on Canvas, everything will be under our modules. So under the Unit 1 module, we have these three things here, and that's what we're going to do today. But we'll focus on the genetics vocabulary Quizlet first. So like I said before, the whole goal of this assignment in particular is just to introduce you to those words and definitions before you are given any kind of context. So I have this Quizlet here for you. You'll click on that and it'll take you to the Quizlet page. And if you have not used Quizlet before, it's kind of like creating virtual note cards. So here we have flashcards. On one side we have the vocabulary word, and on the other side, when I click on it, is the definition. Now there's other ways you can study these terms, but the big focus is, do you know what they mean? So I like using the flashcards option. It's very similar to just looking at them, but also if you like to be read to, like to hear things being pronounced out loud, you can also click on this button.
DNA segment that code for physical traits.
Yeah, if that's what you're into. Quizlet also has some fun games that you can play if you're trying, if you're struggling with learning these words and need a little extra help. Once you feel like you have a good handle on these words, I want you to take this test. So this test is 11 questions. I was just going to ask you, questions about words and definitions. I want you to take this test until you receive a 90% or better on it. Once you have, and you could take this multiple times. Once you have achieved a 90% or better, you can do one of two things. You can either take a screenshot of this page, as long as I see Quizlet test in your grade, and then you're going to turn that into Canvas, or you can go to print test, save it as a PDF, and save it to your computer that way. Either way, you'll go back to Canvas, click the Submit Assignment button, and use your File Upload tab. Whether you screenshot it or saved it as a PDF, it should pop up as one of your most recent saves or downloads. So it should be fairly easy to find this way. Here are the directions again if you just kind of get lost as to what you need to do. But just go to the Quizlet, study the cards, take the test, take a picture of the test, turn that in. And that's it for that. And these notes will cover two things. One is just the man, the myth, the legend, the one guy who really got us all start thinking about how these traits are passed on from parent to offspring. And then we're just going to end with some vocabulary words, mostly that you went over in Quizlet, but I'm going to give you some context to them so you know how we use them in genetics. I do have a copy of these on Canvas, so if you go to our modules page, they'll be right underneath the Quizlet. So Mendelian genetics vocabulary, that's what we're talking about. So that's where you'll be able to find this. But let's go ahead and get started. So starting off with Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel is known as the father of genetics. He's really the guy here. He was an Austrian monk and was very passionate about plants, so he was a botanist as well. And this guy was around in the 1800s, early to late 1800s. He was the one that really studied how traits were inherited in pea plants. So he worked with pea plants a lot. He tested to see how different characteristics were passed down from generation to generation. And he developed these laws of inheritance, in which we'll talk about next week. Mendel's work was not recognized until the turn of the 20th century. So after his death, it wasn't until the 1900s where we finally saw his work and thought, he's onto something, which is not really new in science. It actually happens often, which is kind of interesting to think about. But he is the guy. So what he did is he tested pea plants. He essentially took a mom and a dad pea plant and he made them have babies. And he did this multiple times to see how different traits like color, size, shape, how all of those show up in those offspring. So he figured out that traits are indeed hereditary and are passed down from parent to offspring, something that we just deem as common knowledge now was a huge realization 1,000 years ago. So when we're talking about heredity, or if I talk about how something is hereditary, I'm just talking about how that trait can be passed down from parent to offspring. So if something is inherited, you get it from your parents. And anytime I use the word trait, I'm just talking about any characteristic that can be passed down from parent to offspring. So this is all physical traits, so eye color, hair color, height. Do you have dimples? Do you have a widow's peak? All of those are examples of characteristics. Genetics is the overarching subject in biology we're talking about, and it is just defined as the study of heredity. So we're just studying how these traits are passed down from parent to offspring. And as a reminder, because last semester we did start talking about DNA a lot, we did talk about genes, and I just wanted to remind you that on that long piece, or those long strands of DNA, code for absolutely every single thing your body needs to survive. So these genes are specific parts of that large strand that code for specific traits. So out of that long strand, we have a small portion that codes specifically for hair color. We have another portion that codes for dimples. That kind of idea. Another thing I wanted to talk about before we kind of get into the genetics terminology, we talked about DNA a lot. We're still talking about DNA here. This is what the DNA strand looks like, and they get into the shape of chromosomes. So these chromosomes are literally just made up of DNA. It's all kind of scrunched together. All living things have chromosomes because all living things have DNA. Us as humans, we have 23 pairs or 46 total of chromosomes. So here's kind of a little picture of all of our chromosomes. Now, they don't look this nice. There was actually a scientist who took a picture of chromosomes in a cell and organized them, which is pretty wild. But these are your chromosomes. Now, you might see that there are pairs, right? These are identical, these are identical, these are identical. And that is because you get one set from each parent, right? You're kind of taught that you are 50% your mom and 50% your dad, and that is like literally correct. You get half of your DNA information from your mom and the other half from your dad, and that's what creates you as a very unique individual. Now, on that route, when we're talking about genes on the chromosomes, so here we have 2 chromosomes that are dark blue. Genes are those specific parts that code for a certain trait. So the light blue part here, let's say it codes for dimples. Okay, so you're looking at this part. Now, these letters here, the capital A and the lowercase a, are known as alleles. Alleles are specific genes and their variants that make up the offspring traits. Okay, so if we're talking about dimples, we have a couple different options, right? You either have dimples or you don't have dimples. Those are our 2 different variants. The alleles talk about those variants. We show alleles as letters, so it could be literally any letter, but here we have A. And alleles can either be dominant or recessive. Dominant alleles look like uppercase letters. Okay, they dominate. They're the big, strong ones, so there's the uppercase letters. Recessive alleles are small, lowercase letters. When you have a dominant allele, that is going to dominate over any other allele. For example, if we're looking at dimples, like down here, if you have it's a dominant trait. So if you have a dominant allele, you'll have dimples because it'll mask everything else. If you have one or more dominant allele, you will definitely see that dominant trait. The recessive allele, that lowercase letter, you need 2 recessive alleles in order to see the recessive trait. So if we're looking at dimples again, you need to have 2 lowercase letters in order to not have dimples. Otherwise, you have dimples. And again, you get 1 from each parent. That's why we have 2, 1 from each parent. Now, looking at the difference between genotype and phenotype. Genotype is the genetic information of an organism, and a phenotype is the physical traits of an organism. So genotypes you cannot see, phenotypes you can see. And how these 2 words are related is that genotypes code for phenotypes. What your genes say will show up physically on your body. That's essentially how they work together. Now, an easy way to remember the difference between these two words is looking at how they start, their prefixes. So genotype, geno sounds like gene, and here we're talking about the genetic information. Phenotype, pheno, means we're talking about the physical traits of an organism. Phenotype, physical. They sound the same. If you remember, phenotype is physical and genotype is genetic, then you are going to be super successful because we're going to use these words a lot. All right, so when it comes to phenotype, again, phenotypes are the physical traits of an organism. So test yourself now. What are some phenotypes that you notice about this child, this puppy, and or this kitty? All right, so hopefully some of the phenotypes you may have noticed are brown hair, brown eyes, thin lips, brown, white, black fur, large ears, brown eyes, black nose, yellow eyes, gray fur, any of those. Anything that's physical that you can see is an example of a phenotype. All right, when it comes to genotype, this is the genetic information of an organism. And genotypes are denoted by the letters. So these are the different alleles, right? Dominant, recessive. A genotype can either look like this, or like this. Remember, we're still using letters, and uppercase versus lowercase is a dominant or a recessive allele. But two come together, one from each parent, to give you your genotype. Now, we talk about genotypes in a couple different ways. We can either say that they're homozygous or heterozygous. Homozygous means that the combination of genes involve two dominant or two recessive alleles. So a homozygous genotype would look like this with two dominant alleles, or it could look like this with two recessive alleles. These genotypes are also known as purebred or purebred genotypes. Heterozygous means that there is one of each. So you have one dominant and one recessive. So it'll always look like this. One of each. One dominant, one recessive. And these are called hybrids because you're combining different ones together. Now, just like with genotype and phenotype, an easy way to remember the difference is to know what the prefixes mean. So homo versus hetero is as simple as remembering that homo means the same. So in the case of homozygous, you're looking at the same allele, so either both dominant or both recessive. If they're hetero, that means they're different. So in heterozygous, you have one of each. They're not the same, they're different. Here's examples here too. So we can look at the shape of these organisms, the color of these organisms, or the sex of these organisms. So these two pairs of organisms are different, right? We either have what looks like a male and a female, or a blue and a pink. And they are different. So I would use the prefix hetero to describe these pairs of organisms because they're different. Down here, I have two of the two pairs that are the same. So these are both male or blue, and these are both female or pink. Because they are the same, I would use the prefix homo. Okay, the same. Same exact thing applies when you're looking at the alleles, right? Two of the same, homo, homozygous. Two of the different, hetero, heterozygous. And here are just some pictures to kind of help with understanding how they're related and what they look like. So genotypes look like letters, right? We can either have two uppercase, one lowercase, or two lowercase. So that's either homozygous dominant, heterozygous, or homozygous recessive. Those are genotypes. Those are the genes. You cannot see these with your own two eyes. These code for phenotypes. So we're looking at fruit flies here. So these genotypes that have a dominant allele will code for the dominant trait, which is normal wings. Over here we have a double recessive or a homozygous recessive genotype. And so finally we'll be able to see the recessive trait. The recessive trait is the wrinkled wings. Here's another one. So homozygous dominant, that's what we call this genotype. So two dominant alleles give us this phenotype, so red feathers. The heterozygous genotype looks like this, one of each, so they're different. Hetero means different. They have one dominant, one recessive. The dominant allele still dominates, so that's why we still have a red feathers. Lastly, we have homozygous recessive. Homo means same. So these are going to be the same, and they're going to be both recessive. So that's why we have two lowercase letters. And since we don't have the dominant allele to mask the recessive, now we see the blue feathers in all of its glory. And that's it for the notes. If you have any questions about anything on this, please, please, please let me know as soon as possible so that I can help you out as soon as possible. Lastly, I have a practice assignment that I want you to do to just practice these vocab words. Do you know what they mean? So on Canvas, under modules, this will be right underneath the notes that we just took, and it's genetics vocabulary practice. So what you'll do is click on this link, and it'll take you to Google Slides. So you do want to make a copy. And on this assignment, there are two slides. The first slide focuses on matching prefixes with what they mean. So we talked about genotypes, phenotypes, homozygous and heterozygous, and how those prefixes help you remember what they mean. So all you have to do is read through these definitions and click and drag the prefix to where you think it goes. Which box does it match up with? That's what you do for slide 1. For slide 2, you have these words again, genotype, phenotype, heterozygous, and homozygous, and you are going to put them into your own sentence. You're going to create a sentence using these words. I'm not looking for definitions or anything. I want your own words, your own sentences. And it could be as simple as an example of a genotype is. But yeah, once you're done with that, you'll go here, click on Submit Assignment, look this document up on Google Drive, and submit it when you finish. If you have any questions on this also, please let me know.